Hi, so this tutorial, if you can call it that, is going to go through the basics of figure design in Illustrator. It's not going to focus on figure feng shui. It's going to focus more on how do you use Illustrator and how do you get it working. Of course, as with most things, the best way to use Illustrator is by practicing, but this will hopefully help you get started. First things first, I'm assuming you're watching this as a UNCG affiliate. So as long as you have a UNCG email, you can go and download Adobe Creative Cloud and download Illustrator from that. So I'm going to demonstrate this with Adobe Illustrator 2025, excuse me. And so if you go to your applications, you'll see Illustrator should be installed here. And you should have a copy, again, assuming you're in my lab and watching this. Put a copy in Cool Extras here under Templates. You're going to want to put a copy of the template that we're going to be using. And this will load up in Illustrator, and this helps just get around some of the common file color issues and also gives you the palette that I like to use in figures. It will also give you a nice letter size artboard to work with along with some margins. And so when you see that, that's how it needs to be in Illustrator under Cool Extras templates. And so if we open Illustrator, and the tools that I'm going to show you here have been in Illustrator for a long time. They're likely to be there through many versions. Their placement might change. Indeed, the where things are in your Illustrator might look very different from where mine are, but the shortcuts, the tool names should all be the same. So it doesn't really matter where things are. And you can customize Illustrator quite a bit about where you want to put things. And Illustrator also has really good community resources for how specific tools work. So I mainly want to give you an idea of what those tools are, and then if you have specific questions, you can look those up. So you can see when it opens, by default for me, it shows all of these different resources. I'm going to start with a new from template. And it's going to load up the templates, and you'll see it defaults to this folder, and this is the figure there that I'm using here. Again, if you're in my lab, this will be in the resources folder with some date, which is usually when it was last updated. I'm going to double click on that, and Illustrator is going to load it in. And so this is, some figure X at the bottom. You can see I've got guides turned on to show you where we have to get an idea of 1-inch margins, and I have a million different window toolbars that are throughout this that we're going to go through. So a couple things for orientation in Illustrator. Obviously, mouse wheel is going to go up and down here. If you have a horizontal scroll, you can do that. If you hold down the middle button, if you have a middle button on your mouse, you can quick drag around like this. Command plus and Command minus will allow you to zoom in. I use this a lot. So those are a couple key things. Again, you can easily look that up. I figured the easiest way that we can do this is kind of go through a lot of the common tools that I use from top to bottom here. I might use some in between just for example purposes. I will explain what I do a little bit more in depth for that tool in question. So if I create a shape and then demonstrate a tool on it, I will then explain how to make a shape later. Okay. So first things first, we start with this arrow key, which should be self-explanatory, but it sometimes isn't. So let's assume that we have this red box here. Ooh, that's a bit dry. Let's look a little bit better. Ooh, that's a horrible contrast. See, I said this wouldn't be about feng shui, and here we are. Okay, let's assume you have this box here. The default kind of tool that I always come back to is this black arrow. This is the direct selection tool. You can see Illustrator helpfully shows you an example of what it can do. This is basically your click and drag thing. I click on my object, I drag it around. Pretty self-explanatory. It is the arrow with the black fill, and you can always get to it by pressing the V button on the keyboard. Very helpful shortcut. Next tool down, very similar, but a bit different, the direct selection tool. Now you'll see how this is in that little sailboat diagram that Illustrator is demonstrating for you here on the left-hand side of the screen, how the direct selection tool works. So notice how my shape here, if I zoom in a little bit, you will see that it has these different white boxes here. If I press A now, which is the shortcut for the direct selection tool, a couple things happen. I'll do that again. So I was in regular selection, now I'm in direct selection. So you see my cursor becomes white or gray, and you can see that now the ends of the shape are now blue. And what that means basically is I can click on one of them and just drag it around, right? So I'm directly selecting one part of it. That's how you can think about it. This is where Illustrator's strength comes into play. This is where it's working with vectors here. You have full control over your shape, and this is going to be really powerful as you move throughout using Illustrator. And you can do a couple things when you're playing with these points here. You can delete a point by pressing the minus button to pull up this tool here, which I believe has the name. Some of these tools I never actually know what the name is. Again, you can look these up. Some of them are buried, but this is basically deleting a point, right? Pressing the plus button will allow you to add a point. And then I could go back to A for direct selection and drag that point around, right? So you can do a bunch of things with the direct selection point. So those are our two options here. And you can see each of these has like extra things buried. I'm really just touching the surface here. So far we've covered direct selection. I press V and I can just drag my thing around. I press A, now I can click once and then move this around. Direct selection can be a little bit confusing because by default, when I press A, if my object is selected and I click on my anchors, it's gonna move all of them. You'll notice that's because all of the anchors here are blue. So if I just click on one of them, the others are now white. So be intentional with what you've clicked on. Now I'm just dragging this one. You can probably guess if I shift click now, this second anchor here, and I have these two selected, now I'm just moving these two. This can be really useful if you just want to make a shape bigger in one dimension. So if I hold down shift, for example, it'll constrain it to be like horizontally large. So if I like want to make a membrane larger or something like that. Okay, next down, I'm gonna get rid of our shape here fully. You've already seen me make a shape. Rectangle tool is probably the most basic tool. Click and drag to make your membrane, or your rectangle. You can also just click on a point and have it generate a rectangle. I don't do that, but you can do that. I should note, escape always gets you out of a tool, which is really useful. Like getting out of using a tool. Basically hit escape if you're stuck in something, and then V to get back to direct selection. So yeah, that's rectangle. You can make rounded rectangles simply by dragging them in here. And you'll notice if you have, throughout as I've been doing things, you might have noticed this panel over here. This is the properties panel. It's a relatively new thing in Illustrator. I don't know, maybe 5 years old. Basically, it sums up a lot of the other windows. That's what these panels are technically called. Under window, you have an exhaustive list of all of these different things. And sometimes it can be confusing to know where to look for stuff. Like I just want to know the dimensions of this rectangle I made. Properties is nice because it kind of combines the relevant information for the thing that you're working on and shows it there. So for this rectangle, it says, well, here's the coordinates, here's its size, this is the transform window. So if I were to pull up the transform window, for example, it would show this information and a little bit more detail. It's kind of hidden here, but it's giving you a breakdown. This is a breakdown of the appearance of the align panel. You can see another example where I have the full align window here. Properties is showing me kind of a preview of that. Super useful to have that open and then just use it as you go. You can see as I click out of it, now it's showing me things from other things that might be useful now that I've clicked on an artboard, which we'll get to exactly what artboards are. Once I've selected this rectangle again, you can see I can change the dimensions. I can make this bigger, right? One thing that's really cool about Illustrator and programs like it is you can be very precise about how you adjust your shapes. So let's say this isn't too exciting, but I don't want to constrain the proportions. I just want it to be longer. Excuse me, let's make it longer without being higher. I can do that. If I do want to constrain the proportions, I can do that as well. Constraining the proportions, kind of like when you're cropping a picture or resizing a picture you're not squishing it or stretching it. This can be really useful because by default, you can do all sorts of weird stuff. You might have seen, to give you an idea of what I'm talking about with text, especially in Illustrator, it can be confusing. I'll get into this, but this is an idea of what I mean. If I just make something wider without making it taller, that's not constraining the proportions, right? This is not desirable. But I can, I'm just undoing here, Command Z. I can have constrained proportions on, and now I can change my sides and maintain the fidelity. We'll get more into the text tool in a second. I just want to use that as an example. But the other thing that's really useful about Illustrator is that you can be very precise about how you transform things. So you might have noticed that when I was making that rectangle bigger, and I'll show you again, I'm going to turn off constrained proportions. I'm going to make it smaller this time. Do you see that it got smaller from the left-hand side, almost like it shrunk from the left? That's because this little diagram here is set to this rightmost dot. So if I switch this to the leftmost dot and then make this larger, it will extend from the right. Again, this can be really useful when you want to be very persnickety about how you're going to handle the shape. You can even do like the bottom right and have it constrain proportions and then grow out from the bottom right. So see how the bottom right hasn't shift position. It's kind of like an anchor point. I don't know if that's the exact term that Illustrator uses, but that's one way to think about it. Okay, that's most of what I want to cover with the rectangle tool. Of course, you also have ellipse tool, which is going to make ellipses. In Illustrator, you can hold down Shift, and it will constrain this to be a circle. Super useful. So your ellipse tool is also your circle tool. You have the polygon tool, which makes polygons. And once you've made a polygon, you can then grab this, not that slider, you can grab this handy slider and simply define the number of points you want in your polygon. So that's how you make a triangle in Illustrator. Very common tool is the line segment tool. In mine, it's buried under the rectangle tool. Pretty self-explanatory. Click and drag. By default, though, it gives no outline to the line. So you'll see for appearance, you always have a fill and a stroke. A line by default is just a stroke. It's just an outline. So you can go over here and say, or where I have my swatches here, you have redundancy. Let's say I want to make it black, right? Well, first I have to click on the stroke here or the outline to get it to be the forefront. You see that subtle little change? Hopefully you can see that on your monitor, but this is, depending on which I select here, will depend on if I want the fill or the stroke. Let me take a step back and show you how that looks like with the rectangle tool here. So if I select fill here, I'm changing just the fill of the rectangle. If I want no fill but select the stroke, now I'm selecting the outline of that rectangle. And this is how I created that monstrosity of a rectangle earlier on, where I can independently adjust the fill and the stroke. Now, as I was saying, a line is just stroke. And you can see because I had that color selected, it's now showing this cyan as the stroke. I can increase the thickness of my line right here. And if I click on stroke, I can, over in appearance, under properties on the left here, I have some fun things that I can do. I can make rounded edges, which can be super useful. I can adjust, I can make it a dashed line, which you can't really see right now because it's so fat, but now you can see it's a dashed line. I can add arrowheads. Very confusing sometimes for folks to figure out how to do arrowheads in Illustrator. This would be how. I can adjust that arrowhead. I can make it a double-sided arrow. I can flip the arrowheads. Another cool thing is I can change the size of the arrowhead without changing the size of the stroke of the line. So you have a lot of options over here. Another thing really useful for us who wants to draw membranes is if I draw my line here, find the brushes window. Again, all of these, if they're not where you think they are, if they're not where mine are, you can pull them up from this window, from the window drop down. If I go to brushes though, the template that you're using, if you're using one of my templates, should have this membrane pattern, brush. I believe brush is the correct term in Illustrator. Super useful, right? So now the stroke is going to be the heads of the phospholipids. I can grab a point and drag my membrane. So I can do that. Except, ew, that's not how membranes look. So I have a couple of options. You see how this little bevel point came up here? I'm going to zoom in so hopefully you can see that. I can click on that, and this will now have a radius associated with it. A bit better, but still kind of icky. Other thing I can do is convert this point from a angular point to a rounded point. Ooh, much better, right? Now I have this helpful little handle that allows me to take full advantage of manipulating my membrane. You can also click the S button to activate the scale tool, and I can resize the handle such that it's now symmetrical. I'm doing both at the same time. I'm going a little fast here, but remember, you can always pause this, of course. Now I'm back to direct selection. Remember, we started at the beginning, moving that around. Just to review, if I clicked selection with V, move the whole thing, press A, direct selection, grab my point, drag my point around. So we started with a simple line. We covered a lot of different Illustrator tools really fast. Other fun stuff you can do, you can break things in half. So select on the point you want to break in half, you click break here, and now this is two different lines. Great. I can select them again, both of them with shift click, so I select both, and now I can join them. And now it's joined them through the path of least resistance. That can be super useful too, although it has created some ugly consequences here. Just to give you an idea of what you can do with the line segment. Okay, we've covered selection, direct selection. I skipped over these two. I'm going to do those in a moment. We've done line segment, we've done rectangle, ellipse, polygon. Let's talk about the pen tool, because it can be a little confusing. Honestly, I use the curvature tool more, but both of these are very useful. Think of drawing in Illustrator not like drawing in Paint most of the time, where we're like using a brush stroke like that. You can do this, you can totally do this, but oftentimes what's more useful, and the tool that I was using there is the paintbrush tool. But the curvature or pen tool is kind of like drawing with those wooden boards with nails in them, and where you connect them with rubber bands. So you kind of control where you're connecting things. If that didn't make sense, don't worry about it. But if I click on my curvature tool, for example, I click a point here and then click another point, it's going to try and create a line between the two. And it'll automatically create curvature as I go. And if I connect this, I've now made a shape. I use this a lot. Now I can move my shape around if need be. The main difference is that by default, the pen tool is going to just create lines with discrete angles instead of curvature. Of course, you can always go back into these, and as I just showed you, you could make some of them curvy, some of them not. Illustrator, part of the reason why it's so scary is that you can do whatever you want. So you have options here. Okay. The text tool. Text tool is a common confusing thing in Illustrator. So I'm going to click on it. By default, it'll give some lorem ipsum, placeholder Latin text that means nothing. And what's nice is you can see the character window is now being shown in properties. This should be pretty familiar. Common shortcuts like control or command B to make bold won't work in Illustrator. So you have to like click here on the drop down and change that for your font, bold, italic. You can do underlines. It's hidden under here somewhere. It's a little bit tricky, but you can do it. There we go. So you can do all that. The common thing that's going to trip people up is that by default, at least in my version of Illustrator, this is object type. We're not used to thinking about that explicitly in most programs. What do I mean by that? Well, let's say this text box is too small for me. Oh, I want to make it bigger so I can fit more words. Great. Whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. That's annoying. So what you can do when you make a text box, go to Type, and go to Convert to Area Type. You'll notice when I do that, the options around this text change a little bit, but not much else has changed. Now, if I open this up, it's behaving a little bit more like a lot of us expect a text box to. And now I can enter, add stuff, more things. Great. You can always, oops, I've now gotten rid of myself. You can always create a bug that you can't fix. There we go. You can always convert back to point type. And you see it's going to go around your object here. Super useful. Another annoying thing potentially, or useful thing, depending on how you think about it, is that numbers, once you make numbers and letters, they don't really behave like objects. They behave like type. But what if you want to treat this not as a 1 anymore? I want to make this an object. Oops. Hold down Shift to keep it the same size as I make it bigger. Constraint proportions. I want to treat this like an object. You can always go to Object, Expand, OK, and now it's an object. Now if I wanted to, I could edit this 1 as if it were any other object. Might seem overwhelming, but actually super useful, especially if you want to align it as if it were an option and not a piece of text. So those are the salient points for Illustrator's text. You can do a couple of useful things. Go to Edit, Spelling, Spell Check. You can turn it on all the time. The other useful thing is you can go to View, and you can have it, I always forget exactly where it is. Sorry, it's under Type, and you go to Show Hidden Characters. This will show you where your spaces, where your ends of lines are, where your paragraph breaks are. This can be super useful when you're making a poster to see, like, do I have extra spaces very visually. Word will do this too, of course. Most processors will do that. Sometimes I leave this on for a while, especially when I'm getting close to the end of something and I just want to confirm that everything's spelled right or everything has the proper spacing. Super useful. Those are the bare bones with text. Okay. Text tool. Okay. One other thing that's super useful is the eyedropper tool. So let's say I have this rectangle and I have a second rectangle. And this one I'm going to have a brown background and a pink center, just for high contrast example. I'll even give it a very large stroke there. The eyedropper tool doesn't work like you might think it works. So this is the eyedropper tool. In a lot of other eyedroppers, it's just going to copy the color and apply the color. Illustrator applies both the stroke and the fill to the object. What do I mean? So let's click on the eyedropper tool with my thing selected with the black square. If I click on the green magenta square, notice that not only did the magenta go, but the green stroke went as well. So that can be annoying if you just wanted the magenta but wanted to keep whatever outline was on this, or vice versa. So keep that in mind. Might be a way to change that under the hood. I've never tried, but that's how it works by default. Other thing you can do is with the eyedropper tool, you can hold down Option, and you see how the eyedropper tool is now looks like it's got something in it. Like here it's empty, here it's full, and it shifts the orientation, holding down Option. Now, mouse keys are on. Now it's applying whatever you have selected to other things. Can be useful, might be overwhelming. Okay. Since we have two things here, now is a good time to talk about grouping. And I'm gonna, just for ease of talking about things, I'm gonna do this with objects that are clearly distinguishable and have no border. Okay. In Illustrator, you can select objects by just highlighting like this. Unlike PowerPoint, which needs you to have the whole object surrounded by your selection box to select it, Illustrator will take, as long as a part of the object is caught in your little lasso, your little box here, you will select that object. This is the selection tools parameters. That can be annoying for folks switching from PowerPoint. I find it useful at this point. Things to consider. If I grab both of them, I can hit Command G to group them together. I believe this is also a drop-down option. As you might suggest, as grouping suggests, they now move as one. If I double-click on the object, notice how this little window has popped up. This is super useful in that they're still grouped, but I'm now in that group. I can now manipulate them, hit exit to be out of the group, and now I can move them around. Useful when you have an artboard with lots of groups and you don't want to break the group. I'll also point out the layers tool while I'm doing this. You can see down at the bottom right here, we have layers for the artboard, and everything that we've made, including the guides that are already here, are in this dropdown. And you can see the group, which I haven't labeled anything here. We can just say, we can call it my group, has these two squares in it if I click on the dropdown. And you could move them around to other layers. You can create your own layers here. Those of you that are familiar with Photoshop will like this probably because you're used to layers. I don't know if I'm in the minority. I don't find using the layers particularly useful in Illustrator. You might. I find it challenging. But it does show you how well things are grouped, and it lets you easily see what's selected. So for example, you can see that my group here is selected by this blue square. I can click on other things in the layers panel to change what's selected. I can go in here and select just this square, for example, and manipulate it. So lots of tools there. Okay, I'm gonna ungroup these because I wanna show you one of my favorite things in Illustrator. And I'm gonna bring the Align tab over because I think this is super great. If you've ever been frustrated by using Align in other programs. Let's say that I want these two things to be at their midpoint together. I want them to be aligned in the middle. But I don't just want them to be aligned in the middle. I want them to be aligned to the middle of the green one. Because if I highlight both of them and click the Align to Middle button, see how they're now both have moved and they're both in the middle? I didn't want that, right? I told you that I wanted to move the middle of the magenta thing to the middle of the green thing. There's not an easy way to do this in other programs. Again, I mean like PowerPoint. Certainly there are other Illustrator-like programs out there, but like if you're coming from PowerPoint, you don't really have a way to do this. Illustrator has a way to select key objects. So here's how you do that. Select both of your objects. Just regular mouse click, left mouse click on the object you want to be a key object. This object now has this darker blue outline around it. Now if I click the middle here, it's going to align the middle to the middle of this object. Notice how also the Align To has now this Align To Key object. There's a little key in there. You might not be able to see it on your screen, but it's the far right here. So I have three options always. I can basically do the default, which is what I was showing you here, which is like the PowerPoint style of like, just find the middle. That's what's being shown here. Find the middle. I can click on one object to make it the key object and then align to the middle. Or, also useful, is I can align it to the artboard, which would be, what if I want these to be the middle of the artboard? Well, I've zoomed in a lot, but you can see if I zoom out, they're now in the middle of the artboard. If I want them to be the left of the artboard, they can do that, right? Other thing that's very useful is the distribute function. So let's say I make another straight shape now. Let's make it cyan here. Let's make this yellow. Okay. Let's say I want these shapes to be distributed equally. Again, you might be familiar with this in PowerPoint. I want the gap here to equal the gap here, or to be distributed. I want to be distributed horizontally. I don't know how else to say this other than demonstrating. Select them all. and click Distribute Horizontally. Here's distribute them by the artboard because I had that selected. I'm going to undo that and click Align to the objects and have it distribute. This is what I like. It now created this even space here and here. Pretty cool. Even more cool is I can click on the key object to click on this yellow square to make it a key object. Now, when there's a key object selected, this really useful tool comes up. And it's basically, how far away do you want something to be? By default, it's 0. So if I click this distribute horizontally, it's going to say all the other objects that are selected here will now be distributed 0 points away. They're touching essentially. Well, let's say I want it to be 3 points away. Now they're 3 points away. Really useful for figures when you're aligning micrographs. Really useful. Let's say I want to bring this blue square to be my bottom kind of anchor point, and I want this top one here to be 6 points. There you go. Unexpected. 6 points away. Click on my key object. Now it's 6 points away, and I want this magenta one to be 2 points away for whatever reason. There we go. Super useful. And by using the key object, I can say, I don't want this blue one to move. I want everything else to move around it. So I use this align tool a lot. Very, very useful tool. I think that's all I wanted to say about the align tool. It can be your friend. The other thing that can be your friend is the artboard tool. So let's get rid of these for a moment. The white space here, that's paper size, is your artboard. And if I hit Shift O, I open up this tool, which is the artboard tool. You see now 01 artboard 1 is selected. I can resize my artboard. I can move my artboard. And that's super handy. Over here, I also show the artboards that I've got, and I can rename them. Let's say that this is figure 1, for example, right? One of the other things that I'm going to want to do, or I'm going to want to do in Illustrator, is export things. And so artboards are really useful for exporting. And to demonstrate that, I'm going to open up a file that I'm working on for a grant that I'm about to submit. And now you can see my actual workspace. It's a little bit different than what we were looking at before. There's a lot less white space, and that's because of how I export things. So you'll see I have 13 artboards here. I can double click on the number to go to the different artboards. Pretty useful. I can go zoom out and hit Shift O, and it will show me all of the artboards. Again, very useful. I can move things around if I want. Very helpful. But let's say I want to export one of these. It's time for this to go into a PowerPoint or into a paper that I'm writing. Okay, let's export this figure here. So if I go to Shift O, I can see that this is a bad example because there's some sort of bug here naming both of these 3. So let's do, I don't know, let's do this graph. This is number 8. You can see it's selected over here. Fun tip, whenever you have an artboard selected, press Command 0 and it will zoom in on that artboard. Again, I sound like a broken record, but it's very useful when you spend a lot of time and you just want to center something. Again, when you have the artboard selected, Command 0, full screen it. Great. Okay. Best way to get things out of Illustrator and get them into your program of interest. You can screenshot it, but again, that can cause problems, especially if you want to maintain it the exact size. What do I mean by that? Well, for my text tool here, this is 8.92 text. That's the size that I want. I want to know what it's going to be in my Word document. So I'm going to go to File. I'm going to go to Save a Copy. It's going to pull up this window. Might look different on yours, but most of the salient options will be there. I'm just going to throw this on my desktop. And I am going to change the format from Illustrator to PDF. Easiest thing. You might be thinking like, oh, a document, why? PDFs are essentially images. for our intents and purposes. And I'm going to go from all to range. And now I'm going to change the range to number 8. Or I'm going to try to change it to number 8. There we go. And I'm just going to call this example graph. Now Illustrator's only going to export this. When I click save, it's going to pull up another dialog here. I have this set to an output called paper, where basically everything has been unchecked. No compression, no marking, everything at its maximum quality, essentially. You can save these presets on your computer as well, or you can just go through every time you do this and just don't downsample, don't do any of these things to reduce quality. And then I'm just gonna hit Save PDF. And so now, if I go to my desktop, I have my example graph right here. And I can now import this into any imaging, any software that I would like. So Word, whatever. That's another can of worms, how to use Microsoft Word. Those are the main things that I want you to take away. There's lots of stuff I'm not getting into, like guides and rulers. A lot of these things can go trial and error. That's pretty much it for now. I might make more of these, I might not. But I hope you found this useful.